Hi, this is Robert of MayflowerBookshop.com and Mayflower Bookshop in Berkeley, Michigan. And I'm back to share with you Rudolf Steiner and his connection to H.P.Blavatsky and Isis Unveiled and her secret doctrine, as well as her Voice of Silence and Key to Theosophy. Now, again, I'm trying to speak to fellow students. I'm not really a teacher. I'm a student of Theosophy, Rudolf Steiner, Neoplatonism, Hermetics, Manly Law, Tibetan Buddhism, and more. And I'm sharing with you fellow students who are trying to figure out what truth and love is, what truth and compassion is, what peace and stillness, meditation, and virtue, happiness, giving our gift and receiving what the world has for us to grow more. So if you're listening to this for the first time, you may want to go back and look at my talks on the Voice of the Silence. You may want to read The Key to Theosophy by H.P.Blavatsky. Be very helpful if you read The Way of Self-Knowledge or The Path of Self-Knowledge by Rudolf Steiner, and his Outline of Occult Science or Esoteric Science, as well as Rosicrucian Wisdom, Christianity as a Mystical Fact, his Theosophy. These are very important books. And if you think of yourself as a Rudolf Steiner student or anthroposophist, Rudolf Steiner was the head of the Theosophical Society, Theosophy, Anthroposophy. And he didn't quit because of Blavatsky. He quit and started, he was forced to quit, actually, by Annie Besant and working with Leadbeater, who wrote him a letter that said that if he didn't join the Order of the Star with Krishnamurti and drop his leadership in the esoteric school of Theosophy, which had 3 degrees, and drop and close the Theosophical Lodge that he was the leader of in a few countries, mid-Europe, that he would be kicked out. And you can read those letters, and when he responded that he had to quit, and then he started the Theosophical Society. And imagine you quit some organization and you use their same words. So he, in his letter before he quit, he said that he was going to not join the Order of the Star and Besant's new Theosophy, and that he was going to continue to follow the masters of wisdom and compassion, wisdom and harmony of feelings of the original masters of Theosophy written about in the Mahatma letters, and Blavatsky mentions them in her books, and that he was going to follow the original leaders. That would be H.P. Blavatsky, Judge, who wrote Ocean of Theosophy. So here's my point. My point is that, like Blavatsky mentions, that there's 7 Earths, and we're on the 4th Earth, and of that 4th Earth, there's several stages, of which we're on the 5th. And that 5th stage that we're on, that 5th stage, Blavatsky and Steiner have different words for it, but we're on the 4th Earth, which Blavatsky calls the 4th round, and we're in the 5th stage of that. And of that 5th stage, which has 7 too, every stage has 7, we are entering the 6th stage of that, and that would be going into the Aquarian age, of which Steiner hints and Blavatsky says in her wonderful writing called Esoteric Character of the Gospels, where she talks about the importance of Christianity as a mystery religion, initiation, knowledge, enlightenment, and St. John's Gospel and the Word and the Christos. She really gets into it, and how Christians aren't really behaving as Christians. Most Christians in our modern day haven't been following the guidelines of the Sermon on the Mount, which pre-Christian was written by Hermes in the Divine Pymander. But then in the New Testament is the Sermon on the Mount. Now again, let me not confuse you. I'm a fellow student sharing my notes, and many of you are sharing your notes with me. And that has prompted me to continue this series of talks that I'm sharing on YouTube and that I give privately. And I give readings where I tune your individual astrology chart into this play of Theosophy and Anthroposophy. Theosophy being the wisdom, Sophia is Sophia, the wisdom of deity or God, Theo. And Anthroposophy is the wisdom of manas, man, woman. And it could probably interest you to grab the Isis Unveiled, buy a copy of Isis Unveiled, or the Secret Doctrine from Mayflower Bookshop, or wherever you can get it. Steiner said that Isis Unveiled was written by Christian Rosicrucian. And it's a fun thing to look up. It's a fun thing to look up Anthroposophy on page 294 in a footnote in the second volume of The Secret Doctrine, that it's the key to terrestrial wisdom and, understanding, the mind and the understanding, which is really the manas and the buddhi. Like the understanding is the heart. It stands under the head. Now again, there's lots of simple, beautiful, poetic thoughts and words and images that can inspire the mystic in you. But Blavatsky, like Steiner, talks about spiritual science and how there's that modern day materialistic scientists have won the bottom rung of 7 levels of consciousness. And as you know, as a student of Rudolf Steiner, there's the physical, etheric, astro, and then there's the ego, and that's the 4. There's the ego or the lower manas that identifies with the higher manas, the higher spiritual universal mind, perhaps nous of Plato, and identifies with which Steiner calls the spirit self. And then there's the buddhi, which Steiner calls life spirit, and the atma of Theosophy, which Steiner quits the Theosophical side and changes to the idea of spirit man. And again, whenever we say man or woman, we're talking about, especially when it comes to atma and spirit man, we're talking about the mind of spirit, the wisdom, the Sophia, which is the stillness of God, the wisdom Sophia, which is the wisdom and the stillness, understanding vehicle for the awe and awe, the one in awe and the awe in one, the Atma, spirit man, Steiner calls it. So you can also look up the Anthroposophical, the Anthropology, page 274 of Volume 2, more references to perhaps where Steiner got some of his ideas. And it's really important, I'm sharing with you as fellow students, that to read the right books on Blavatsky and Steiner, and to understand how to read the right Tibetan Buddhist books, because Rudolf Steiner in Knowledge of the Higher Worlds and its Attainment, initially The Way of Initiation and Initiation and its Results, which I published. I was once the president working with Hans in the teacher training in Southfield, Hans Gabert. We had started the Great Lakes Anthroposophical Society chapter, and it later joined up with the Detroit Anthroposophists, but there was a couple years or so when we were trying to create an organization that would hold Michigan and the Midwest. When I was younger, I was the president of the Young Theosophists in America. Many of those presidents, such as Joy Mills, would go on to be president of the Theosophical Society in America. And I was young and had really idealistic notions, like Blavatsky's first magazine was called Lucifer because she thought that Lucifer was the angel, the bearer of the light, not the light. That the Christos is the light and the deeper understanding of the heart and buddhi. The buddhi manas joins up in our breath and our word and our thinking, in the head and heart, which I go into quite a bit in a couple of my talks online. But originally, Blavatsky's, who started the Theosophical Society with many notable people, and Gandhi read her, and Martin Luther King read her, and George Goodheart, great healer, read, and Einstein's daughter showed me letters that Einstein was, had the secret doctrine open and heavily underlined when he died. Pope John Paul was said to have Rudolf Steiner opened next to his bed when he died. But those are other stories. But I want to tell you that Rudolf Steiner's first magazine was called Lucifer Gnosis. And it was originally this idea that Lucifer was originally kind of more of a good guy than a bad guy. And that was quite opposed to Ahriman or Satan. Or crass materialism. These are just superstitious words that represent being too spiritual or too materialistic, right? That's why I'm saying, as a fellow student, it's a dangerous thing to call yourself a theosophist or an anthroposophist, and you haven't really researched what H.P. Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner researched, which Manly Hall totally researched. Blavatsky was the first to bring the Bhagavad Gita in a clear way to not only to Gandhi, but to the West through her friend Judge in the Bhagavad Gita, which Gandhi read, and Mahatma Gandhi, he freed the attempt of slavery by the British in India by using the Gita, and he studied the secret doctrine. He was a student of these things too. I think a lot of people just use stuff to get to where they're going. Did you hear that? So that's why all spirituality begins with purification of the astral body or the psychic body. Originally there was the physical body, then there's the psychic or astral body, then there's the higher mind, and then there's the spirit. And a human being has these four within them. And Steiner tried to simplify this as the physical, etheric, astral, and the ego. And that initiation was to contact the higher trinity to transform the higher triad or trinity, to transform the thinking, feeling, and willing, or the head, mind, senses, sense-bound thinking, and the heart, and the feelings, and the physical. Blavatsky had her own way of saying this, which is very clear when you read the Key to Theosophy. If we really look, my fellow students, at how tough and rough and difficult today's world is, we can quote Steiner and Blavatsky warning us about this. For sure. We can specialize in demonology and telling us everything, sharing everything that's wrong. But few of us are able and capable of sharing the truth that would carry us from lifetime to lifetime, and the idea of reincarnation and karma in a way that we could directly experience these things. I think Rudolf Steiner pointed out that the true esoteric book wasn't just that you had intellectual reflections. It was that you were experiencing the spiritual worlds that would transmute the lower worlds or obscured shadow worlds of the negative emotions and the negative thinking and the acting out of separateness, rather than that there's oneness. And I think that Rudolf Steiner totally gets that Blavatsky was talking about what was clearly stated in Neoplatonism, but everywhere, in ancient India, Egypt. In ancient India and Persia, she calls Mazdian, and Egypt, Chaldea, and then goes into the Babylonian and the Roman and the modern Catholic struggle of the Catholic Roman Empire, and via the Greek and to our modern times and the birth of the conscious soul in the 1400s that Steiner talks about, and the appearance of the tarot cards, and a struggle between in trying to hold this unifying principle of the oneness with the several manifestations of that oneness in the allocation of the different bodies, and the queen of this being either the whore of Babylon in the new revelations in the Bible, or the divine Sophia, which is in relationship as the great mother and as the ultimate wisdom of the crone and as the passion for life. Sophia is in cahoots with the higher Trinity as well as the lower six, or seven if you count her as the center. And there's that quote, that great quote by Solomon, how Sophia builds her temple, 7 pillars to her temple. So I wanted to share with you the importance of this purification by a new way of thinking, a deeper way of thinking, that if we're going to help the world be in some cooler place, we may want to take a step back into our deeper stillness and really look at the experience of history, look at the experience of the present day, look at where it's going in the future, spiritually and materialistically, and soul-wise. And to step back into our own radical stillness and radical reevaluation of what is Theosophy, Anthroposophy, Tibetan Buddhism and their 7 virtues as being atypical of our 7 levels of consciousness. Blavatsky said that the human being was never meant to be denser than the fragrance of a flower. And Rudolf Steiner's 7 steps of developing the chakras as virtues, he goes into it. Really, that's 7. It's six virtues, and the 7th is the prajna Sophia. It's also the radical stillness of the Father, you might say, or the oneness. Again, I go into this in my other talks. Today, I want to share with you this relationship of Rudolf Steiner. I remember in the early days, when you look at his esoteric talks, he was actually, at one point he said that when you're hearing me speak, you're not hearing me, you're hearing the master so-and-so. Wisdom and compassion. I mean, those are the early days where he was channeling the masters. Is that what he was doing? I mean, a lot of anthroposophers freak out, not only at the early days, but the later days when he's trying to start a new mystery school, thinking about rewriting the first class and second and third, obviously, that was based on this idea of the early 3 degrees of Masonry, and Blavatsky goes into it in her esoteric school, which he was the leader of, had 3 degrees. And he, of course, died before he finished. How Blavatsky talks about the apes are from human beings as a fallout of some great early sin in the Lemurian age. I mean, Steiner clearly talks about Lemuria and Atlantis, and Blavatsky was there first. She talks about modern Christianity in the garb of Hermes, but more materialistic. She talks about the fall of the gods, or the virtues, the fallen angels, and how Michael is the head of the archangelic Diane Koan, she calls them, but she says they're the archangels. And she talks about the war in heaven and our spiritual mission. And that the war in heaven is in our minds, like Tim Buckley refers to in his song, is the war inside your mind? The myth of the fallen angels. Now, where do we hear that? And I mean, all these people that are anthroposophists that are preoccupied with demonology and technology and armament, and they're fascinated so much by that. Where they used to be fascinated by Lucifer, now it's very interesting and worth a panel discussion where you hear both sides. But in our modern day, we don't really have a lot of the leading researchers in anthroposophy and Blavatsky. We don't really have them in the organization level. That's why you see great thinkers and researchers that are reading the books and talking to each other, but they're not really part of the organization. And even Rudolf Steiner and Blavatsky were always claiming they were going to quit the organization because they weren't representing Theosophy and Anthroposophy. I mean, again, I'm not putting anybody down. we so need. If it wasn't for the Anthroposophical Society and if it wasn't for the Theosophical Society, I wouldn't have discovered Rudolf Steiner in a secret library in the basement underneath the Library of Theosophy, the major one in America. And that's where I found his origin books. And quickly later, I'd become anthroposophist too. And then I met the Dalai Lama, and I met all those old people that were in the Theosophical Society and the Anthroposophical Society, and really loved this wisdom that they had. And so I became kind of a student, and I'm still, unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm still a student. But Blavatsky talks about the fall of the gods and the angels, and how Saint Michael is very similar to Saint George and the dragon. And, she also talks about the myth of the fallen angels and how Prometheus, she's shocking when she talks about the divine feminine falling from heaven and the kind church fathers, when the divine feminine, the ultimate Sophia, descended like Ishtar and Inanna and others, Astarte, later male figures of Ulysses and Odysseus, Prometheus, that they fought to earth, and the kind church fathers gave her the name Satan. Whoa. The divine feminine had a big fallout. Was that 3000 BC or way earlier, after? And this whole idea of descending into the underworld, Demeter, with Hecate and Hermes' help, to fetch that fallen part of our soul, Persephone. Hercules, Ulysses, Odysseus, they went down too to come back up. This descent and the turning point of time, which you can read about in The Secret Doctrine, that hint of the descent going into the ascent that Rudolf Steiner really elaborates on as the mystery of Golgotha and the Christos, as kind of a way of identifying with a universal mind that can redeem us, can redeem the fallen earth. I could go on forever about this relationship and how important it is to not only take Ita Wegman back into the Anthroposophical Society, but to perhaps take H.P.Blavatsky, who very well could have been the reincarnation of Joan of Arc, as I hint in my book, Astrological Aspects, the Art. Perhaps. But again, Blavatsky makes it very clear that we're students and that we make mistakes. And that isn't the point. It's not about making a mistake. It's about getting up and continuing again. You can fall, but you got to get up. Like a song that my friend Dougie MacLean in Scotland sings. And she talks about the music of the spheres. Steiner elaborates quite a bit. He talks about music being perhaps the only art that lives in the spiritual and just visits Earth. So Blavatsky really gets into the mysteries. She gets into the logos and the fallen logos and the never fallen logos, and how the giants of Atlantis, giants of the north, as time went on, the southern parts of the earth, they were shorter people. She talks about the coming force in Keeley. A lot of people around Rudolf Steiner are really in to Keeley and the coming force and Paracelsus. Blavatsky gets all into it. And the Druidic stones, I went to Wales and visited those stones that Steiner talked about. And it's very powerful elemental forces are still there, whereas most of the earth is dying. Blavatsky talks about masonry being, in Isis Unveiled, being originally 3 degrees and not 33, that the Jesuits had infiltrated. She talks about, you can kind of like get a quick idea of this intellect versus the heart and how we need to rebreathe them together. And this idea of the mind as being the moon and understanding the heart sun and this manas buddhi, samkara, the mind and understanding, are respective deities of organs. This idea of the sun and moon as the mind and understanding, even Samkara talks about it, and Arjuna. The body and the soul and the spirit in the Atma, in the universal self. So you can see that H.P.B. and then Steiner, we're living in a world where the Grail has been broken into pieces, and we all have different pieces that we're trying to put together as what part of the giant elephant or the cow has lost itself in diversity and acting of separateness. And Blavatsky talks about this Atma Vidya, the occult science, the evolution of life, the 7 earths, the 7 cultural periods. Michael, the leading archangel, she talks about the Rosicrucians as being the circle and cross and identifying with the center of that spirit and matter as being the development of the soul. And the Rosicrucians followed the Grail guys and the Templars and the early Arthurian mysteries and the Gnostic. I mean, come on. The fire philosophers, the wisdom and love that is the 7th principle that shares in all the matters of the physical, etheric, astral, and ego, and the manas and the buddhi. It needs that Atma. It needs that spirit man. And Blavatsky goes into the spirit self, the 3 and the 4, or the 4 being 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, the 10. It's a real mystery. Not only of the Masonic apron and the home plate and baseball, the cube and the Trinity, but also the Kabbalah. The idea of the 4th member being the Arhat, or once removed vantage point when it's identified with the higher. Sophia, the Theosophy, the Anthroposophy, Revelations as initiation, and Job as an initiation treatise. That's H.P.Blavatsky. Later, Steiner elaborates and goes into it. The Cosmo and Anthrogenesis of the secret doctrine, the importance of the Trinity, the triple evolution of the spirit and our psychic mind, soul, and matter. It's amazing that this is all everybody's really should be working together more. But when you find, these different organizations, Self-Realization and Yogananda and the Yogi people and the Theosophy, you go to Tibetan Buddhists and there's like 5 or 7 different groups that don't talk to each other. There's broken. The Grail has been broken, every organization, and you go to Christianity and there's hundreds of different Christianities. You go to the Jews and they have all these different Jewish, Blavatsky goes way into how important the Jews are and the Kabbalah and how that came from Chaldea, Babylonia. I mean, shouldn't we be researching this at our meetings rather than having theosophical or anthroposophical or yogic meetings that have turned the spiritual or Christian or Jewish Kabbalah at all the different spiritual groups? Have they turned into religions and social clubs? Have they turned into authoritative rather than self-evident truth? Have they turned into who's higher than who else? I remember Rudolf Steiner was really upset over everybody arguing who was closer to him and who was higher than so-and-so and who was lower than so-and-so. And he just said, look, if you can enter your dream consciously and make something better happen, you're spiritual. Everybody shut up. It's like Jesus, the apostles are talking about which part of the body's higher and which part's lower for a long time. And Jesus interrupts them and says, which part would you have me cut out? And goes into a rap how we need each part. We need to not talk about lower and higher chakras. If you're in the heart, the lower and higher are like passion and energy versus the universal intellect. Everything's perishable. And in the heart, we have radical stillness and oneness. We have radical everything connected to everything. And we have radical awakening mind stream continuum. The yogi mind, I call it, in my book. So Blavatsky talks about the Christus Sophia, this mind and heart thing. And I could go on, and I think I should go on in part 2 of this. But I want to mention how the friction, Blavatsky dies and there's a huge friction. Besant cheats, well, I don't know if I should say that, but Annie Besant gets in, Blavatsky's dead, and everybody fights for who's going to run the Theosophical Society. And William Q. Judge has papers that claim, Blavatsky signed them, that he should be the leader of the esoteric school of Theosophy, or he should help run there's this whole argument that takes place, and Judge is kind of thrown out by hook or crook. After Steiner dies, there's the whole same thing. And Ida Wegman's thrown out. The Goetheanum had burnt. Blavatsky writes Isis Unveiled, and she's threatened by revealing too many secrets of the mystery schools. And she goes into hiding. And Steiner says she's in occult imprisonment. It's a very complicated story. But it still goes on. And this whole idea of the virgin space of Atma, the 7 souls of the Egyptian mysteries, the 7 vehicles or the wheels of the chakras, the 7 planetary divisions, the 7 steps of the human being, and are those in polarity too, like sun and moon? Or is it, yeah. The principles in the Secret Doctrine, Volume 1, page 153, or in her Key to Theosophy. Did Steiner come up with Waldorf Schools and gardening? Is that a unique contribution, or is that part of this Blavatsky hint at that too? She says that the cross was an afterthought of Christianity, but it's truly part of the esoteric school of ancient India and Persia, Mazdian, Zoroastrian. Blavatsky gets into it. Did Steiner just come up with these things all himself, or is he he's the further step? He's the youth that has come up now being one of our elders, but at one time was youthful, studied everything. So there is no, the word evil is lived backwards. In the long picture of the oneness, there is no evil. It's that when we lose track of the oneness, we lose track of the first earth evolution of warmth and loving kindness and compassion. And we lose track of the Buddhic principle of light and Sophia and the heart. And we cease to identify our mind with the ultimate compassion and wisdom, insight, and at-One-ment rather than atonement. That's where the trouble begins. So I'm going to continue this because I think I'm going too long. And I in these 33 minutes, I wanted to share that we need to start. We need to have all the unique contributions in different organizations and societies, spiritual and social and individual, to be independent, but also to see their camaraderie and their connection to each other, and this relationship of what is real spiritual knowledge that would get us further. And it would help so much if we would all study Neoplatonism and Hermetics and Steiner and Blavatsky and Tibetan Buddhism, which has such a great inner science of compassion and selflessness, and they all say it in a different way, and they all help each other to understand each other. And so I think as an artist and as a free individual and as someone who loves all the earth and humanity and who loves themselves, that each of us should think about this next step in this threefoldness and fourfoldness and 7 and 10 and 12, if you understand that. So it's Robert of MayflowerBookshop.com at your higher self-service, and you can find me there. Bless your heart and your mind and your soul to go on.